So I'm sure you've done a ton of these, but basically, I am gonna cut myself out, or that's the idea. That's the goal.
Hmm.
So as much um, as you can put like all the information into your statements that you would need with which to understand them, the better. Um, Pretty good to try to avoid like he, she, they, it, and use like Chris, Jared, Carp, Olympia,
Yeah.
stuff like that. And yeah, and I guess how I've been starting with most people, if you'd like, is just to have people introduce themselves and then kind of go into either how they met those guys or kind of what their general, first thing they think of about the topic is. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm Calvin Johnson. I live in Olympia, Washington. And Carp. It's exciting to be here for the documentary Kill All Redneck Pricks, a love story.
Indeed. Uh, so, what was your first impression of their band upon, like, kind of remembering hearing it for the first time?
Carp played at the North Shore Surf Club. Um, and that must have been early 92 or something. That was the first time. I'd heard about them a few times from people like Adam and Brent Claude Turner, Ryan Baldoes. They'd mentioned Carp and their awesomeanity, and they played. It was like, I don't remember exactly the context. They were added to a bill at last minute or something, or it was like they just snuck on the bill or something like that. But I don't know who was playing, some other band. Except all those people, they were much more excited about Carp playing than they were about whoever was really playing. And they played. It was very short. Seemed like it was just a burst. It's just like a burst of Carp. And it was fun. I remember it being a lot of fun. And afterwards, Chris came up to me, and I'd never met him before. It seems like I would have remembered this guy if I'd met him before. And he was very friendly and very earnest. He was just a very sincere person. And he had a beautiful haircut.
Yeah, tell me about the haircut.
Mostly, I remember that he had bangs, like his hair was, and it was longer in the back, but it was cool. He was very young. He felt like he was young, younger than other people in bands. So he might have been like, I don't know, 15 or 16 or something, but very present.
And were they, yeah? What kind of just general ages were they all at that time?
They were all in high school, Tumwater High School, and which didn't last long. Jared was the only one who finished high school. Chris and Scott felt like it was not worth their time.
What did you get the idea? What would they rather be doing? Like,
It was. They started playing a lot of shows in Olympia, which was great, and they were They were heavy, and there was such beauty to carp. But fun is really the thing I remember most about those guys, is they knew how to have fun, and it's like they were never bored. They knew how to have fun without spending money. They just was like, entertain themselves and everyone else. It was, they were a good presence. Absolutely. They lived down Michelle Orr lived down the hall from me at the Martin Apartments. And sometime during this, like August or September of '92, they moved in with her, Chris and Scott. I don't know if they officially moved in, but they were there all the time. And yeah, there was always laughter going on over there. Giggling, more like, is probably the more accurate term. A lot of giggling. A lot of giggling when Scott or Chris are around.
What was your idea of where all that fun came from?
Jared, we didn't see much because seemed like he had, he seemed more involved in his life as a family member and student and things like that. But Chris and Scott were around a lot at the Martin and shows and downtown, and that's just in their nature to enjoy life. And you don't get that they just enjoyed life. And they didn't know how not to. Yeah. Not that Jared didn't enjoy life, obviously. They're all very funny, they have a sense of humor that they all have different senses of humor, though. And so, hanging out at the Martin, Chris was there a lot. Scott was there, just felt like he didn't have anywhere else to be. And if you could hang out with Michelle and Chris, why would you go anywhere else? Yeah.
So describe for me, like, what was their humor like collectively, if you had to generalize it.
It was a very Tumwater sense of humor. They're from Tumwater, and yeah, we'd already been indoctrinated into the Tumwater world via like Brent and Claude Turner and Unwound, Vern Mumsey, Justin, of course. It was just getting deeper with carp, just deep Tumwater, the far reaches. Yeah. Jared took me to the practice room once, and which was at I think it was originally his grandmother's house out there on Little Rock Road. And it was just like, all right, this is the real Tumwater. And, years later, 96, they were still carp, they were still doing stuff, but we had moved into the Olympia Knitting Mill building, and in the studio that became Deb Narcotic Studio, there was all this painting that had been done by students in 1947 or 48 from Olympia High School. And Nikki McClure had read that the class of 46 was having their 50-year reunion. And so she called them up and said, well, we got this room with all this graffiti from you guys. And a bunch of the class officers and people who were involved in the reunion committee came up to look at it to see if they could include the room. They already made all their plans, but they thought maybe there's some way we can include this room in our in our reunion plans. And they came out, and they're all like, "Oh, look at me," and they recognized all the names and everything. And there's one of the women was Jared's grandmother, who had graduated in '46 from Olympia High School. And this is before there was a Tumwater High School. So, and she lived out on Little Rock Road back then when she was a teenager. And so these paintings were all done at high school dances after the football games. And so she was like, "Yeah, I always heard about this place. I've never been here before. I've never seen this before because I could never go to the high school football games or the dances after the games because I lived on Little Rock Road and I didn't have a car and there was no buses back then. So she had to go home after school on the school bus, and could never go to the football games or the dances, and because at Little Rock Road it was at least, I don't know how far away, 5 miles down the road. So she'd never seen this graffiti or this room that she'd heard about where the dances took place. And then she said, "Oh, you have a studio. Maybe you've heard of my grandson, Jared Warren. He's in the band Carp." And we're like, "Oh yeah, of course, yeah." And they said, "I've been told they're the loudest band ever." We're like, "Pretty loud." But it was exciting to have this connection, this Olympia Tumwater connection, Carp Olympia, going way back 50 years, not just the 5 years that we knew about.
What was it like, the practice area that Jared took you to?
Oh, it was like a room in the garage, I think, or off the garage. Yeah, beautiful old house that, like, white clapboard, just a nice old Olympia farmhouse. Of course, all that's all been, even since then, it's been developed quite a bit out that way.
Now, you said a minute ago they had what you called a very Tumwater sense of humor. Can you explain what that means?
Well, just the name, Kill All Redneck Pricks. I mean, look at that 45 that Vern put out. And, at the time, it was like Tumwater High School football team, won for like 3 years in a row, had never lost. And at the back of the record, they turned the football team into, like, there was Tim Green as one of the coaches, Vern, and then the band, they put their faces over the team. It was like, Tumwater High School hasn't lost a game in 2 years. Great job, dipshits. I just couldn't stop laughing when I saw that, because it's just like, not only, there's just a lot of, we couldn't give a fuck in the best way, not in a, there's no animosity there. They just were like, whatever. Yeah, they were really, what I loved about it was that it wasn't mean-spirited, but there happened to be perhaps some judgments being made just on the side. I don't know. Yeah. So, yeah. They're always doing stuff, that's the thing. You go over there and they'd be like, Michelle had a job at the Ben Franklin Crafts, so she really got Chris and she got them into, like, puffy paint and stuff. And they were like they were always making these t-shirts with puffy paint and sprinkles all over it and sparkly stuff. And Scott they got out the glue gun, it was cool. Crafts, t-shirts. And there was also an Olympia element to it that was really, really beautiful. Like, over the years, independently, people from Olympia seem to have discovered certain bands and made them their own. And just walking by their apartment one time and hearing the Shags blasting, and just Scott and Chris just really got into the Shags, and that was just such an Olympia thing. It doesn't matter if you're the loudest band in the world, they still love the Shags.
Now you kind of been saying it, but so like, what was your impression of like Scott and Chris's relationship at that stage?
They were inseparable, I mean, I don't know, they were 17 or 16 when they lived in the Martin. They were together all the time and hanging out all the time, yeah. Scott had this, no, Chris had this really cool, Chris had this green, it was like a Ford Falcon that he drove around, and it was just like, yeah, it's beautiful.
Here, hold on just a second. So, how would you describe their humor or their individually?
Uh-huh. Well, they had incredible confidence. That's what I really I admired their confidence. That they're just like, go for it. Just be in a band, quit school, rock, make some puffy paint t-shirts, turn up the Shags, and they were, they would make fun of, I think what they saw is like the jocks or the preppy people, just because I think it seems so absurd to them. But no, I really admired their camaraderie. It was great. I mean, it was like a real band. Carp was like a real band, just like Nation Ulysses, which seemed to be a band that they really liked. It was the same kind of thing. It was like they're all really good friends, and they're making music because they're all coming from a similar point of view, and the music they make makes sense to them. Clearly influenced by the Melvins and Unwound and stuff, but they also had their own thing that just grew out of that. It was priceless. Just to be around that, it's just, that's what I live for, that, to see people coming together and creating and expressing themselves from within like that, from their own place. Yeah.
So, what's your opinion of like bands that kind of happen in the order that you're talking about, where they're like friends and then the band is a byproduct of the friendship rather than like the other way around?
The music the Carp was making just made sense to them. They were into loud, heavy rock and roll, and they made loud, heavy rock and roll, and it's hard to say. Obviously, they're really good friends, but it was almost like they had a mission to make this music. Yeah. They played a lot of shows. It was good. I mean, there's sort of a pattern with Olympia bands. Like, they get together like that. They play every house party and play in the garage, and they're in the basement, and they're playing a couple times a week. And then put out a record, go on tour. And once they've kind of gone out in the world and gone on tour, then they come back and they don't play every week at every party, which in a way is sad. I mean, it makes what they're doing special, more of a special event. But Carp was less like that. They still played a lot of shows. But, their tours were never quite as extensive as other people's because, well, they might have been planned to be extensive, but they never quite came off as planned. So perhaps they never experienced that. Well, now we've seen the world. Who cares about Olympia? Which wasn't exactly everyone's attitude, but it was sort of in the back of their mind. But yeah, carp, pretty cool.
How would you describe Scott's sense of humor?
Scott.
Or just Scott in general?
Well, he's sounds corny, but I can't think of him without seeing him smile. He's always smiling, and he's always laughing even when he's making a funny. You know, he's laughing at his own joke, and it's great. And you're laughing too because it's funny. I feel like I was probably closest to Chris. But yeah, it's a lot of love, I think, going on there. One time, Chris got for his birthday. It was when he wasn't living at home anymore. But for his birthday, his mom showed up, and just out of the trunk of her car, she had this guitar for Chris for his birthday, and it was very moving, and he was really touched. Seemed like just a lot of love around carp, you know, and there was so much support. And yeah.
What do you think the significance was of his mom giving the guitar? I mean,
well, it felt like she was saying, you're doing what you want to do, you're doing what you love, and I support you in that. And yeah, she seemed very proud of his work, which was really cool.
Now you mentioned when you first met him, he was like just really polite and courteous.
Uh-huh.
Nice guy. As you got to know him a little bit better, how would you describe his personality?
That word earnest still comes to mind. He seemed very sincere and earnest. And sometimes he'd hide his fear of the world through humor, or his fear in the world. But he seemed very genuine to me. Yeah. The first record they ever made was on the Boston Knot compilation. It's like a double 7-inch of all covers of Boston, and that was the first thing. Justin Johnson put it out, and he gave me a copy as like, "Hey, this is our first record. I want you to have a copy." And he wrote a little note, and it was really cool.
So sounds like you just kind of like, when he said stuff, you were like, this is what he's actually thinking. There's no
yeah,
layers or lenses.
that's true. That's he's pretty much he's a very straightforward person. He's a very doesn't seem like I didn't experience any great, deception or anything from him. He was always very on the surface, very honest. And when we were working with Fits of Depression, and he's obviously a huge fan of Fits of Depression, good friends with Mikey and everything. And there were some of the people in the band. There were some issues with substance abuse and things like that. And Chris was very concerned. He was very worried about it. You know, he worked with us and the band to try to help solve some of these problems. And I know he spent a lot of time with Mikey and trying to help him in with the band. It was very cool.
And what did you see as like the genesis, or like maybe not genesis is the right word, but context of, you know, why that love and support was targeted at these people rather than other, you know what I mean? Like why it was like band friends, these friends that he had. Do you know? Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
What's that?
Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Why did what?
Well, like, if you're a compassionate person that has that compassion to give, you can kind of target that out anywhere in your life. You know, some people would put it towards their church, towards their school, towards their family. In this scenario, it's towards other musicians. And so I was just wondering.
What do you mean about Chris and all that? Yeah. Well, when the 90s started, we felt like it was like a new era for Olympia. And part of the new era was being in touch with Supertanker and then you know, the band that became Unwound, and those people, and being in touch with these folks who were younger than us, you know, like Justin's 10 years younger than me. But they just seemed so much more dynamic than we had been when we were teenagers. There was so much more going on. They were just like going for it. It was so exciting to watch it happen. And so much enthusiasm, and they had created their own world within the world of where they came from, which is this pretty mainstream high school world. And they picked and choose elements of this punk rock world that they felt that they could relate to. And that's why the Melvins were like, I mean, we liked the Melvins. The Melvins are great, you know, but to them, the Melvins were like the answer. Or like, you know, like, oh yeah, Melvin's great, love them, seen them all the time. But they appreciate them on a much deeper level. And so they had created their own world, and Carp just fit naturally into this world. And it was like Peanuts, you know. There was no parents around. It was just you know, Linus and Schroeder, Lucy and Violet, and of course Pigpen, which in my mind would be like Scott. So.
And why do you think this instant affinity towards the Melvins? What do you think is behind that?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, like when the Melvins first came around, we had all already been into music, and they fit into our world in a way that they were, you know, unique, and we liked them. But for people like Justin or Vern, who grew up listening to the Melvins, that was their formative years. So it was bigger in their, it loomed larger to them, the Melvins did. And when the Melvins, there's always so the Melvins existed, they lived in Aberdeen, Montesano. They played in Olympia all the time, and they started playing in Seattle all the time, Tacoma. And then the Melvins broke up. Oh no, the Melvins broke up. How could they break up? That's horrible. And then, you know, Dale and Buzz are like, well, we're moving to San Francisco. We're like, okay, bye. And then they moved to San Francisco, and we're like, we hear, oh, the Melvins are playing in San Francisco. And we're like, well, no, that can't be. They broke up. Well, it turned out they broke up. For some reason, they had decided they didn't want to play with Matt anymore. So that was their way of getting rid of Matt, was breaking up, moving to San Francisco and starting the band with a different bass player. And then, but it was like when they started coming up to the Northwest again, which was like 88, 89, then they had a whole new level of the enthusiasm for the Melvins was like exponentially larger. And when they played Olympia, it was these huge shows. And this was right before we really got into, we had met all the Tumwater people, but I think that those were the shows those guys had gone to in like 89 and stuff. And anyway.
I'm really sorry. Could you start that over? I pushed the wrong button.
Oh, the Melvins having come from Montesano, which is, although it is the county seat of Grays Harbor County, it's a smaller city than, say, Hoquiam or Aberdeen. It's more bigger than Oakville. But, you know, if you're going from Tumwater to Montesano, you might go through Oakville on Highway 12 or whatever. Anyway, it does seem like there's a working class vibe. And I think that's one of the biggest differences between the consciousness of the Tumwater crowd and the consciousness of the majority of the Olympia crowd is there's a class difference. And that, I mean, that Tumwater thing had been going on for a while, because even before we knew about Supertanker and Unwound, Mikey had been around, and he had a Tumwater connection, and Eric Greenwald had been involved in the early Olympia punk scene, and he was also from Tumwater, and he was, you know, he was a major figure in Olympia punk rock, Eric Greenwald, and he's definitely brought that Tumwater vibe, and it was kind of a working class vibe, and that's always been. I've always found the Olympia scene has thrived on that tension between the working class and the middle class vibe. When Beat Happening first started, there was this club in downtown Olympia called the Tropicana, and a lot of Tacoma people would come down, and that was more of a working class, you know, the Girl Trouble people and Noxious Fumes, and I think they thought we were as strange, and they were as fascinated by us as we were with them, and I think there's that with Aberdeen. It's always been that way with Aberdeen. I mean, and Olympia has always had a fascination with Aberdeen. In the early 80s, we used to take the bus to Aberdeen to go thrift store shopping and just be like, whoa. There was this place called Dill's Secondhand Store that was just a lot of tools and lumber stuff, and then bins and bins of albums, and there used to be a Spar. The Spar which existed in downtown Olympia. There was one in downtown Aberdeen too. So it was like, whoa, we went to Aberdeen, went to the thrift stores, went to the Spar. And so when we first heard about the Melvins, I first heard about them in early '93, because we opened for the Wipers in downtown Olympia. And Buzz used to come to Olympia and go shopping at Rainy Day Records and stuff. And he talked to Dave Rao, who worked at Rainy Day. He's like, whoa, the Wipers, how did that happen? And Dave was like, oh, you should call Calvin. And so Buzz called me up in, I think it was March or April of '93. And I'm sorry, I'm all confused. 1983, this is 1983. So Buzz called me in like March of '83, and he was like, I've got this band, we're called The Nerve, and we're like, whoa, band from Aberdeen? Yes. I was like, well, the people that put on the Wiper show, they're trying to get this club opened, and I'm sure we'd love to get you to play a show there. Unfortunately, it took almost a year before the club actually opened. But by then, the Nerve had become the Melvins, and they played one of the first shows at the Tropicana, which was their first Olympia show, I'm sure. It was in March of 1984, and I was DJing that show, and it was and everyone was like, "Whoa, this band." That show was actually arranged by a woman who lived in Olympia, who'd come to move here from Vancouver, and she and a friend of hers had gone to Aberdeen on the bus, similar kind of thing. Let's go to Aberdeen, and they were just skateboarding around Aberdeen, and they ran into Buzz and his friends, and they became friends with Buzz, and so she was like, "Oh," he's like, "How can we play Olympia?" And so she arranged for the show to happen at the Tropicana, actually, and it's cool because later that same woman had arranged for Mechanormal to play their first show in Olympia, and that became a really important connection. I mean, Melvin's Olympia is strong, but Mechanormal Olympia is also a strong thing, which Eric Greenwald had a big hand in. That he arranged that first Mechanormal show. So anyway, you know Eric Greenwald. He went on to be. His band was called. I know it. They're very prominent Seattle hardcore band. He moved to Seattle, and I have the record. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name. It just hasn't come to me. Anyway, he was like the early Tumwater kid. I forgot what we were talking about. Was there a point to this? I'm just rambling.
You're doing really good. So you were talking about like the differences, the vast differences between Tumwater and Olympia. But these two places are, the other things going on here too, right? Is that these two places are very close together, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. We're Olympia. I mean, where I went to high school, in Olympia High School, and I lived about 3 blocks from the school. The boundary between Olympia and Tumwater is very crazy, and I actually walked, even though I only lived 2 blocks from Olympia High School, I walked through Tumwater to get to school, and there were people who lived 3 blocks away from me who went to Tumwater High School because they lived in Tumwater, and so yeah, it's very they're right next to each other, and but downtown Tumwater got destroyed by the freeway. They built I-5, and so there was no downtown Tumwater anymore. So it always had this ghost town feel, even though a lot of people lived there. It felt kind of like there was no center to it. Yeah.
How would you describe the folks in Tumwater, or just Tumwater as a town?
Well, the brewery was in Tumwater. That's the Olympia Brewery, and that certainly had a lot to do with keeping the town alive. Yeah, we never spent a lot of time in Tumwater. Maybe go to a yard sale there once in a while. It wasn't a destination. When I was in high school, we called it Scumwater. There was they were the T-Birds. There used to be a place in Tumwater, though, I remember like in '89 or so, called T-Bird Pizza that we really liked to go to. And then Tumwater Printing is a place that does a lot of our printing for K. So we go out there a lot, and they're really cool people. Yeah. Tumwater. There was also the Tai Motor Inn, had a lot of strange occurrences over the years. I wonder if it was in some sort of, it's almost like it was right around that area, which is where Little Rock Road meets Trosper Road. It felt like the mystery spot. The Tumwater mystery spot. Just, Brendan Cloud Turner lived just down the street there. Yeah.
Now, how would you describe Olympia as a town, like just like separate, bare bones, like separate from the music scene, just to somebody who had
Well,
no idea?
Olympia is a it's got many facets to it. It's a state capital, but it's also a port town, and so you have these elements of the port, and then the logging trucks going through to the port, and we're in this area where those kind of industries have really died off. But as a child, I remember them being very prominent. Logging and fishing were much more prominent presence in Olympia than they are in today. One of my earliest memories is of going to Lake Fair, and there being logging competitions at Lake Fair, like people log rolling, doing, sawing and climbing with their that was just normal. And of course, this whole area, Tumwater and Olympia, was a much more rural. Farming was a much bigger part of life. Even when I was in high school, a lot of people lived on farms, and there was dairy farming was big, and raising cattle was big. The Farmers Cooperative used to be right down, just 2 blocks over there. It's just a lot of the places that were farms are now turned into subdivisions and housing and things. So the vibe is different. Of course, you get that all over the country. I feel like it's actually a long time coming. I was so surprised that it wasn't like that here. When you go up I-5 to around Seattle, that all happened a lot earlier. That kind of development seemed to have hit Olympia and Tumwater much later than it did other places along I-5, and we got some sort of reprieve. The kind of development that started happening in the 90s felt like it should have been happening 20 years earlier. Yeah.
So how would you describe the music scene then when Carp was coming up, like in the early 90s?
There was a lot of local bands in Olympia. Can't remember exactly who. Treehouse had a couple singles out. Herd of Turtles. There was there was a bunch of bands, and there was some places to play downtown. There was always house shows, though. That's one thing about Olympia. Always had a pretty strong scene, but the really exploded in the 90s when folks like Justin moved downtown. It took him a while. He lived in the trailer for a long time, and but he really got things going at the Lucky 7 house. There were shows and stuff, but then he was like, I'm gonna have a regular thing here, Lucky 7 Coffee House, and that was really cool. I think that started in '93. I think it was like, we should have a place where we just hang out. Yeah. They're so very positive, you know, that those people are very, like, to get things done. Good energy.
Now, what kind of things would you earmark from that time period as being like very much the way things were done here, you know, and what kind of enabled people to get so much done and do, you know what I mean?
Well, you know, there was a night, to me, this typifies Olympia at the time. And this is in March of 93. And Olympia has always been, to me, Olympia has always been behind the times. Like hardcore never even happened in Olympia till like, there weren't hardcore bands in Olympia till like way after hardcore existed. I mean, it just didn't, people didn't really notice, they didn't care. They were kind of doing their thing. And Olympia is like that. And we never, you know, Olympia was starting to get a reputation as a town where rock and roll happened or whatever. But if you came to Olympia, there was, you know, there was no rock club. There was a radio station, Chaos, but it only had rock music, you know, 2 hours a night, Monday through Friday or something. It wasn't like you turn on the radio and you're hearing the latest college rock sensation in the middle of the day or whatever. Things were different here. And so in 93, some people from Seattle, they opened this club here called Thekla. And they're gonna move to Olympia, they were gonna have a club, and they wanted to have, it was gonna be a bar, but also they were gonna have events there. And so the opening weekend, the guy, Pitt, he got a hold of me and said, hey, Calvin. I had met him because he had his club in Seattle. He was like, oh yeah, you should come by our opening night. You should come by and, you know, tell people, you know, spread the word, let people know about it. And so this night that was opening night at Thekla also happened to be a big night. Lucky Seven and the Red House were both having these shows, and every band in town was playing at one of the places. It was like Godhead Silo, Unwound, Carp, Kicking Giant, Heavens to Betsy, and everybody else. I can't remember exactly, but there was like 12 bands. And everybody was going back and forth between the two places, which was great. I mean, it was really fun. It was really cool. And I was like, hey, there's this new club. Thekla is opening. And do you want to go? It's going to be a new club downtown. People are like, huh? What? Oh, that's cool. Anyway, and I couldn't get anyone to go to Thekla to check it out. They were just like, so what? Why would we want to go there? There's these house shows. Everything we need is right here at these house shows. And so I went by Thekla, you know, and it was cool. It was like, oh yeah, but then I was like, well, back to the show. And I thought that was really indicative of of the mood at the time. Like, you're finally getting a real club. And people were like, it didn't mean anything to them.
That's so great. If I get what you're saying, it's kind of like people got so good at providing their own answers and doing things
Right.
for themselves
It's like,
that when the normal channels opened up, it was just kind of like, what do you do with this?
Yeah, it's like why would we go to the latest Hollywood blockbuster when we could watch these home movies?
That's excellent. And how does that compare to kind of what was going on musically, like in the late '80s here, like the time just preceding?
Well, the difference was in Olympia, the '90s, when the influx of this new energy of the Tumwater people and just the difference was that they were just going for it. Like, they had bands and then they got in the van and they went on tour. Like in the 80s, it was like, I don't know, maybe I toured hardly at all, you know. like couple of short tours. But these guys would just get in the van and just go, and they're playing all over the place, you know. And it was like I always thought, well, why don't we tour? Like, why can't we just tour California? It seemed like we had such a hard time getting shows in California, such a hard time getting shows anywhere really outside of Olympia, and but these guys like Justin and them, their music was making sense to their contemporaries. Like our music never made sense to our contemporaries. But they were what they did relate with other people their age. They grokked Unwound, and they grokked Carp and stuff. I mean, there's a generational difference. To me, there's a generational difference between Unwound and Carp. There's a couple of years, and those couple of years make a big difference, because Unwound did they sort of pioneered a lot. That Carp was able to just step in and take over. And they broke a lot of ground for Carp, I think, in the ways that they were a band, that they had figured out how to go on tour, how to make records and stuff. And they helped him out a lot too. You know, obviously Vern did a lot for you know, recording them and things like that. And they played shows with them and stuff. Back when let's see, in '92, summer of '92, I had asked Unwound to play some shows. It was going to be Nation of Ulysses and Beat Happening and Slant Six were just coming out for the first time to play, and I'd asked Unwound to do these shows with us, and but that was right when Brant had decided that he didn't want to play regularly with them, and so they had to cancel those shows. And I know it's very traumatic for Justin, trying to figure out whether the band should continue, and he wanted to play the shows, and he loved Nation of Ulysses, and he was really torn about whether should we just continue playing with a different drummer, or is it one of those situations where the band is these three people, and when it's not those three people, it's something else. I felt like, well, you know, it makes sense to me. It's not like Brant saying you have to break up the band. He's just saying, I'm not going to play, so have someone else play. But anyway, they couldn't play those shows, and Justin had suggested you should have Carp play those shows, and I wasn't against the idea, but it probably wouldn't have occurred to me if Justin hadn't said that Carp should play, and they did, and it was a really good idea. I'm glad that they played those shows, because I think that was the first time that I really felt like, whoa. Like before I was like, oh yeah, they're a good local band, they're great, they're fun. But then when they played those shows with us, it was like they were on this whole other level. They had to, I don't know if the word matured is appropriate in this case with those people, but they had become Carp in the best possible way. And very impressive.
I gotta switch tapes really quick.
Okay.